Stranger, I was 17 years old in the final stretch of my senior year of high school when it happened. My parents had planned a weekend trip out of state, just the two of them. The moment they told me, something in my brain immediately clicked. No curfew, no supervision, just a quiet house at the end of a cul-de-sac tucked away from prying eyes. To me, it sounded like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. By Friday afternoon, I was already in full planning mode. I bought 3 massive bags of red Solo cups, a bundle of ping pong balls, and handed my older brother, who was 21, more cash than I should have trusted him with, to buy beer and cheap liquor. We weren't amateurs. This wasn't our first party, but it was the first one without any adults in the house. The house itself was perfect for it. We lived at the far end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Behind our backyard was a water collection area, a steep, overgrown sump surrounded by dense woods. No neighbors behind us, no street traffic. If we kept the bass low and the front door closed, no one would hear a thing. The rules were simple. Everything happened in the basement. The upstairs was off limits. Bedrooms were locked. My parents' room especially. That door stayed shut, no exceptions. My best friend Leo thought the whole thing was a bad idea. He always did. "This is how stuff goes wrong," he told me while we set up the folding table for beer pong. Too many people. Somebody brings someone you don't know. Cops show up. Parents find out. My girlfriend Bella, on the other hand, was worried about something else entirely. "If someone spills beer on the rug, your mom is literally going to kill you," she said, already wiping invisible dust from the furniture. I tried to play the calm one. The organizer. The guy in control. I told myself that as long as I kept an eye on things, nothing could go wrong. By 9 o'clock, the house was packed. The air was heavy with sweat, cheap cologne, and damp heat from too many bodies crammed into one space. Music thumped through the floorboards. Laughter echoed up the staircase. People drifted in and out through the back deck, their silhouettes stretching across the yard as lantern light flickered against the tree line. At first, everything was perfect. That's how these stories always begin. Not with fear, but with comfort. Around 10:30, the vibe shifted. I noticed it before I understood it. The crowd got thicker. Faces I didn't recognize started appearing. Friends of friends. Kids from other schools. A couple of guys who looked too old to still be hanging around high school parties. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the hallway that led from the kitchen toward the basement stairs. He wasn't holding a drink. He wasn't talking. He wasn't dancing or laughing or leaning against the wall like everyone else. He was just standing there, watching. He looked like he was in his late 30s, maybe older. He wore a faded navy blue windbreaker and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, shadowing his eyes. In a house full of neon clothes and teenage energy, he looked out of place, like someone from a different era who had wandered into the wrong decade. "Leo," I said, quietly nodding toward him. "You know that guy?" Leo glanced over, squinting. "Nope. Maybe someone's older brother. Doesn't look like it," I said. The man didn't move. His gaze drifted slowly over the room, methodical, calculating, like he was memorizing exits, counting people. It made my stomach tighten. I decided to confront him politely, just a quick check-in, make sure he actually belonged there. But before I could get through the crowd, a group of girls cut between us, laughing loudly. I lost sight of him for maybe 3 seconds. When the hallway cleared, he was gone. I checked the basement first. Wall-to-wall people. Hot, loud, no blue jacket. Then the backyard. Groups clustered around the fire pit, smoke in the air. No sign of him. "Relax," Bella said when I mentioned it. "It's a party. People move around." I tried to believe her. About 20 minutes later, I walked down the hallway toward my parents' bedroom. I hadn't planned to. I just wanted to quiet the growing knot in my chest. The music sounded distant back there, like it was underwater. The door was still locked. I let out a breath. Then I noticed the vase. I had hidden the key inside a ceramic vase on the hallway table. Earlier that day, the painted floral pattern faced straight outward. Now, it was turned toward the wall. I reached inside. The key was gone, and the door was still locked. My blood went cold. Someone was inside my parents' bedroom. I pressed my ear against the door. At first, nothing. Then I heard it. A camera shutter. One deliberate click. Then soft footsteps, socked feet crossing hardwood moving toward the master bathroom. I pounded on the door. "Who's in there? Open it." Silence. I'm calling the cops. Still nothing. Then came the sound that made my heart drop into my stomach. A faint, metallic scraping. The bathroom window. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to grab my phone. I ran. I sprinted through the kitchen, nearly colliding with two people who shouted after me, and burst through the sliding glass door onto the deck. Cold night air slammed into my face. I cut around the side of the house, my sneakers slipping in the damp grass as my heart pounded so hard it made my vision pulse. When I reached the side yard beneath my parents' bathroom window, I stopped dead. The screen was gone. It lay bent and twisted in the grass like something discarded in a hurry. Above it, the bathroom window stood wide open, black and silent. My eyes followed the side of the house toward the back. That's when I saw him. He stood at the edge, where our yard dropped sharply into the sump, the dense wooded water collection area behind the house. The moon was thin that night, barely enough to cut through the darkness, but I recognized him instantly. The navy blue windbreaker, the baseball cap. He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding. He was standing there calmly, looking back at the house, but not at me. His gaze was fixed upward on the second floor, on my bedroom window. In his hand, he held a small, leather-bound book. I didn't need to be closer to know exactly what it was. My mother's diary. My throat tightened. I shouted something. I don't even remember what, but my voice sounded small, weak, swallowed by the trees. The man turned his head toward me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. There was no panic there, no fear, just a thin, knowing smile. He slowly raised his hand and waved. Then, he took one step backward, and another. And just like that, the darkness of the woods swallowed him whole. I stood there, frozen, shivering despite the heat of the party roaring behind me. Music thumped through the walls like nothing had changed, like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. I realized then that the man hadn't come to drink, he hadn't come to socialize. He had come for something else. And worse, he hadn't just arrived with the party. I ran back inside through the garage, bypassing the crowd entirely. "Leo, Bella," I shouted as soon as I hit the kitchen. "Upstairs. Now." They saw my face and didn't ask questions. My parents' bedroom door was still locked. I didn't bother waiting. I grabbed a heavy bronze decorative bust from the hallway table and slammed it into the frame near the latch. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the wood cracked and the door burst open. The room was empty. The bathroom window gaped open, curtains drifting in the breeze. "Check the jewelry," I whispered. Bella rushed to the dresser, hands shaking. "It's all here," she said. "Nothing's missing." Leo scanned the room. The bed caught my attention. The covers were pulled back, not messy, not disturbed, but clearly used. The pillow bore a shallow indentation. I leaned down without thinking. It didn't smell like my mom's lavender detergent. It smelled like damp soil and stale tobacco. "He took the diary," I said. "That's all." Leo tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced. Maybe he just wanted to freak you out, but my gut told me otherwise. We shut everything down. I cut the music. I told everyone to leave. I didn't care who complained or who thought I was overreacting. I said the cops were coming, even though at that moment no one had called them yet. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty. Too empty. That's when we started searching. Every room, every closet, every crawl space. When we reached my bedroom, the room he had been staring at from the woods, my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. Everything looked normal, until I noticed my closet door. It was open, just an inch. I pulled it wider. My clothes were shoved to the sides, creating a hollowed-out space behind them. And on the floor, 3 empty water bottles, granola bar wrappers, the same brand my mom bought, and a small stack of Polaroid photographs. My hands trembled as I picked them up. They weren't pictures of people. They were pictures of the house, taken from the woods, from the backyard, from inside the garage through the glass door. The last photo made my stomach drop. It was me, sleeping in my bed. The angle was wrong, too close, too inside the room. The date stamp read 3 days ago. The truth crashed over me all at once. He hadn't broken in during the party. He had already been living there, sleeping in my closet, watching me. The party wasn't his way in. It was his way out. Bella screamed. Leo called 911. The police arrived and tore the house apart. They found his entry point, a small utility hatch in the basement leading to the crawl space, then a vent straight into my closet. No fingerprints, no DNA. He'd worn gloves. They never found him. They did find the windbreaker abandoned in the sump behind the house. A week later, my parents came home. The locks were changed. An alarm system was installed. I moved into the guest room. I couldn't sleep in my own bedroom anymore. 2 weeks later, my mom went to get the mail. There was no letter, just her diary sitting neatly on top of the mailbox. When she opened it, the last blank pages were filled not with words, but drawings, sketches of us, me at my desk, my dad in the driveway, my mom in the garden. On the final page, written carefully, was a single sentence. The guest list was a bit too long, but I enjoyed the music. I'll wait until it's quieter next time. To this day, I don't throw parties. I don't like closed closet doors left ajar. And every time I hear a floorboard creak at night, I wonder, is it finally quiet enough? Only I've always been the type of person who stays on the periphery. In college, I wasn't the guy hosting the ragers. I was the guy who stayed for an hour, drank one beer, and went home to play video games. But in my junior year, I moved into a house with 3 other guys, Mark, Tyler, and Shakes, who were the exact opposite. They lived for the weekend. Our house was an old Victorian in a semi-gentrified part of the city. It had high ceilings, creaky floorboards, and a basement that felt like a dungeon. It was the perfect party house. In October, the guys decided to throw a masked masquerade. The rule was simple: no mask, no entry. It was supposed to add an air of mystery, but mostly it was an excuse for everyone to get drunk without the social anxiety of being recognized. Tyler, the overreactor of our group, was obsessed with the guest list. He created a digital invite with a unique QR code for every person. Security, he called it. We don't want the locals or the creeps from the dorms sliding in. The night of the party, the house was transformed. Dim red lights, fake cobwebs, and about 100 people in various states of costume. There were Venetian masks, rubber Nixon masks, and cheap plastic superhero masks. I was at the door for the first hour scanning codes. It was tedious, but it kept the crowd manageable. Around 1:00 p.m., a group of 4 people approached. They were wearing matching outfits, long black hooded robes, and white featureless porcelain masks. No eye holes, just black mesh where the eyes should be. I held up my phone. "Codes, please." The person in the front didn't speak. They held up a single phone. I scanned it. Access. Granted. 4 guests. Name on the invite, I asked just to be thorough. A muffled, distorted voice came from behind the porcelain. The family. I figured it was some theater majors being extra. I let them in. They moved as a unit, gliding into the crowded living room without a word. An hour later, I was off duty, sitting in the kitchen with Mark. The party was loud, ear-splittingly loud. Someone had brought a professional sound system, and the bass was vibrating the glasses on the counter. "Hey, Mark," said, leaning in close to my ear. "Have you seen those guys in the white masks, the ones in the robes? Yeah, they came in earlier." "Why?" "They're weird, man. They aren't drinking. They aren't talking. They're just standing in the corners of different rooms. One is in the basement. One is on the stairs. One is in the living room. I don't know where the 4th one is." I scanned the kitchen. Standing right next to the refrigerator was the 4th one. He was perfectly still. In a room where everyone was jumping, dancing, or swaying, he was like a statue. The white porcelain mask reflected the red light, making it look like it was dripping with blood. "Hey man," I said, walking over. "You guys having a good time?" The figure didn't turn its head. It didn't acknowledge me at all. I reached out to pat his shoulder, a friendly bro gesture, but as my hand got close, I stopped. There was a smell coming from the robe. It wasn't the smell of a costume shop or a college kid. It was the smell of something chemical, like formaldehyde or heavy-duty cleaning fluid. Suddenly, the figure turned its head. Slowly. It didn't look at my face. It looked at my throat. "The basement is ready," the voice whispered. It wasn't the same voice from the door. This one was female cold, and entirely too calm for a party. "Ready for what?" I asked, my heart starting to pick up speed. She didn't answer. She just walked away, her robe swishing against the floor, heading toward the basement door. I looked at Mark. He had heard it too. "Tyler," I shouted, spotting our roommate across the room. I dragged him into the hallway. "Who are the family?" "The guys you gave the 4-person QR code to." Tyler looked confused, his Robin Hood hat askew. "The family, I didn't send an invite to anyone. Called the family." I scanned the code Tyler. It said access. Granted 4 guests. Tyler pulled out his master list on his phone. He scrolled to the bottom. His face went pale. I didn't generate this," he whispered. "Look, at the bottom of the list, below the names of our friends and classmates, was a 501st entry. It didn't have a name, it just had a string of binary code, and the status was admin override. Someone hadn't just gotten an invite. Someone had hacked the guest list app and inserted themselves." "Where are they?" Tyler asked, his voice shaking. "One just went to the basement," I said. "Mark, stay here." "Tyler, come with me." We pushed through the crowd, heading for the basement stairs. The air grew colder the lower we went. The basement was packed, the music even louder here, but as we reached the bottom step, I noticed something strange. The crowd had formed a circle. In the center of the circle, 3 of the robed figures were standing. They had cleared a space on the concrete floor. They had laid out a large white plastic tarp. People were cheering, thinking it was some kind of performance art or a weird drinking game. "Do it! Do it!" a group of drunk sophomores chanted. The 4th robed figure, the woman from the kitchen, descended the stairs behind us. She walked into the center of the circle. In her hand, she wasn't holding a beer or a phone. She was holding a long, industrial-grade roll of duct tape and a heavy black duffel bag. She dropped the bag. It hit the floor with a heavy metallic thud. "All right, show's over," I yelled, trying to push through the circle. "Who are you guys? Get out of my house!" One of the figures, the tallest one, turned to face me. He reached up and slowly peeled off the porcelain mask. Beneath it wasn't a face I recognized. It was a man probably in his 50s, with a completely shaved head and a look of such intense, focused neutrality that it was scarier than any snarl. "We aren't here for the party," he said. His voice was loud enough to carry over the music, possessing a terrifying authority. "We are here for the collection." He reached into the duffel bag and pulled out a high-voltage cattle prod. The music suddenly cut out. Not because someone turned it off, but because the power to the entire house was killed. In the sudden, suffocating darkness of the basement, I heard the crackle of electricity and the first scream. The darkness was total. In a basement, packed with nearly 60 people, the sudden absence of light and music created a vacuum that was immediately filled by a primal collective panic. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear at a fun horror movie. It was the sound of 100 people losing their sense of orientation all at once. A blue arc of electricity hissed in the center of the room. In that brief strobe-like flash, I saw the tall man lunging. He wasn't swinging wildly. He was precise. He pressed the cattle prod into the neck of a guy standing near the front of the circle, a kid named Sam, from my psych class. Sam didn't even scream. His body just went rigid and he collapsed onto the white plastic tarp like a suit of clothes being dropped. "Tyler, get back!" I yelled, reaching out in the dark. My hand caught the fabric of Tyler's Robin Hood costume. I yanked him toward the stairs, but the crowd was already surging. People were trampling each other, clawing at the walls, trying to find the narrow wooden staircase that led back to the kitchen. But the woman, the one I'd spoken to, was standing at the base of those stairs. I couldn't see her, but I heard the zip rip of the industrial duct tape. Then I heard the sound of a heavy door being bolted. The top door's locked. Someone screamed from the stairs. They locked us in. "Push, everyone push," Tyler yelled, his voice cracking with a terror I'd never heard from him. But I realized then that the family wasn't trying to kill everyone. If they wanted to do that, they would have brought guns. No, this was a harvest. I felt a hand grab my ankle. I kicked out blindly, my sneaker connecting with something hard, a porcelain mask. I heard a muffled grunt, and the grip loosened. I didn't wait. I knew this house better than anyone. There was a small rectangular window at the very top of the foundation wall used for coal deliveries a century ago. It was hidden behind a stack of old moving boxes in the laundry nook of the basement. "Tyler, follow my voice," I hissed. I dropped to my hands and knees, crawling through the legs of the panicked crowd. The smell of the basement had changed. It no longer smelled like beer and sweat. It smelled like ozone and that sickly sweet chemical chloroform. They were gassing the room. I could hear the faint hiss of a canister being opened. I reached the laundry nook. The boxes were still there. I shoved them aside, my fingernails tearing as I clawed at the latch of the small window. It was rusted shut. I grabbed a heavy glass detergent bottle and smashed it against the pane. The glass shattered, and a breath of cool October air hit my face. "Tyler," I whispered. "I'm here," he gasped, crawling up behind me. He looked back into the darkness. "They're picking them up, man. They're just picking them up and putting them in the bags." I didn't look back. I couldn't. I hoisted myself up the jagged glass, tearing at my palms, and wriggled through the narrow opening. I fell onto the damp dirt of the side yard, coughing. I reached back in and hauled Tyler out just as a pair of gloved hands reached into the laundry nook to grab his boots. We didn't stop. We ran toward the street, expecting to see the usual line of parked cars and maybe a few stragglers. Instead, we saw the vans. 3 identical white Ford Transits were parked haphazardly across the sidewalk, blocking the exit of the cul-de-sac. They had no license plates. Men in the same black robes were standing by the back doors waiting. They weren't hiding. They were calm like workers, waiting for a shipment to arrive at a warehouse. "The police," Tyler breathed, reaching for his pocket. I lost my phone. I lost it in the basement. "Mine's in the kitchen," I said, my heart hammering. "We have to get to the neighbors." We sprinted toward the house next door, banging on the door of Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who usually complained about our noise. No one answered. We ran to the next house. Dark. The next. Dark. It was then I realized the scale of the admin override. It wasn't just our guest list. They had cut the lines to the entire block. We hid behind a row of hedges as the back door of our house opened. The 4 robed figures emerged, carrying the heavy black duffel bags. But the bags weren't empty anymore. They were heavy, bulging with the weight of human bodies. They loaded them into the vans with terrifying efficiency. One of the figures stopped. He turned his head toward the hedges where we were crouching. He still had the porcelain mask on. He didn't run toward us. He just held up a phone, my phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter. He tapped the screen. A second later, the car alarm on Tyler's Jeep, parked right next to us, began to blare. It was a signal. The men at the vans turned toward us. "Run!" I screamed. We bolted through the backyards, jumping fences, crashing through briars. We didn't stop until we reached a 24-hour gas station 3 miles away. The clerk looked at us like we were insane, 2 kids in torn costumes, covered in blood and dirt, screaming for him to call the cops. When the police finally arrived at the house, it was empty. The power was back on. The music was playing a haunting low-volume loop of a children's nursery rhyme that definitely wasn't on my playlist. The house was spotless. The beer cans had been bagged, the floors had been wiped, and the white plastic tarp was gone. Out of the 100 people who had been at that party, 14 were missing. The police investigation was a nightmare. Because of the masked theme, many people didn't actually know the full names of everyone they were talking to. The QR code system had been completely wiped, factory reset. There was no digital trail, but the most chilling discovery came a month later. One of the missing guests, a girl named Maya, was found wandering a highway in a different state. She was physically unharmed, but her memory of the night was gone. She had been drugged with a sophisticated cocktail of amnesiacs. Under hypnosis, she could only remember one thing. She remembered being in a room that smelled like cleaning fluid. She remembered a man's voice, calm, professional, telling someone that the collection was incomplete. Then she described the man's face. She said he looked like a normal middle-aged guy, but he had a very specific tattoo on his inner wrist. A series of vertical bars, a barcode. A few days after Maya's story hit the local news, I received a package in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a single white porcelain mask. I turned it over. On the inside of the mask, written in the same architectural script from my first story, were 4 names. Mark, Tyler, Shakes, and mine. Below the names it said, "Inventory noted. We don't like to leave a set unfinished. See you at the next one." Tyler moved out the next day. Shakes dropped out of school. I stayed, but I don't live in that house anymore. I live in an apartment with 3 deadbolts and a camera that feeds directly to my phone. But sometimes when I'm scrolling through social media and I see an invite for a secret party or an exclusive event with a QR code, I feel a cold sweat break out on my neck. Because I know that somewhere out there, the family is still building their collection, and they still have 4 empty slots in their inventory. This happened about 5 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. I had moved to a rural part of Washington state for a job in forestry. It was a lonely existence, but I liked the quiet. One of my coworkers, a guy named Xavier, was the calm thinker type. He'd lived in those woods his whole life. He invited me to a bonfire party at a house owned by some of the locals. "It's a bit out there," Xavier warned me as we drove his truck down a logging road that seemed to lead into the heart of nowhere. "But the beer is free and the people are harmless. Just don't wander off into the brush. These woods eat people." The house was a sprawling 3-story cabin made of dark cedar. It looked like it had been built by hand, addition by addition, over decades. There were about 30 people there, mostly loggers, park rangers, and their families. It was a far cry from the college ragers I was used to. It was quiet, the only sound being the crackle of a massive bonfire and the low murmur of conversation. The host was a man named Silas. He was a skeptic by nature, didn't believe in GPS, didn't like cell phones. He made everyone leave their phones in a wooden box by the front door. "Connection to the earth, not the tower," he'd say, with a dry laugh. I followed suit, though it made me uneasy. Around midnight, the air turned freezing. Silas suggested we move the party into the rec room in the basement. "I've got a pool table, a dartboard, and the good whiskey down there," he said, grinning. As we descended the stairs, I noticed the basement didn't match the rest of the house. The cabin was rustic and warm. The basement was industrial. Reinforced concrete walls, heavy steel doors. It felt more like a bunker than a rec room. Xavier nudged me. Silas's dad was a survivalist. Built this place during the Cold War. Pretty intense, right? "Yeah," I muttered. Intense is one word for it. The party continued downstairs. The overreactors in this group were a couple of city kids who had tagged along. They were already getting spooked by the isolation and the lack of cell service. They kept asking Silas if they could have their phones back to check the weather, but Silas just kept pouring them drinks. I was playing a game of darts when I noticed a door at the far end of the basement. It was a heavy sliding steel door, the kind you see on a meat locker. It had a heavy padlock on it. "What's in there?" I asked Silas as he walked by with a tray of shots. His face didn't change, but his eyes went cold for a split second. "Just storage, friend. Old tools, winter supplies. Nothing for a guest to worry about." But as the night wore on, I started to hear it. It was a sound that didn't belong in a basement full of laughing people. It was a rhythmic. It wasn't coming from the music. It was coming from behind that steel door. I looked at Xavier. He was deep in a conversation about timber yields and didn't seem to notice. I looked at the city kids. They were too drunk to notice their own names. I moved closer to the door, pretending to look for a stray dart. The thump stopped. Then, I heard a voice. It was faint, muffled by the inches of steel and concrete, but it was unmistakable. "Please," it whispered. "Is someone there, please? I'm so cold." My heart stopped. I looked around the room. Silas was at the other end of the bar, his back to me, laughing at a joke. I leaned my head against the steel. "Who is this?" I whispered. "My name is Caroline," the voice sobbed. "I was at the party. The one in July. Please." He told me I could leave if someone else stayed. "Please, don't leave me." A cold realization washed over me. Silas didn't throw these parties for the connection to the earth. He threw them to find people who wouldn't be missed. I turned to find Xavier to tell him we had to get out of there, but when I turned, Xavier wasn't there. Standing in his place was Silas. He wasn't holding a tray of shots anymore. He was holding the key to the padlock. "You have a very curious nature," Silas said, his voice flat and terrifyingly calm. "Xavier told me you were a fast learner. That's a shame. I usually prefer the ones who don't pay attention." I looked toward the stairs. 2 of the harmless locals were standing there blocking the exit. They weren't smiling anymore. "Xavier," I called out, my voice trembling. Xavier stepped out from behind the bar. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. "He's a good fit," Silas Xavier said quietly. "No family in the state, no girlfriend, just the job. He'll be perfect for the winter rotation." I realized then that the rec room wasn't a place for guests. It was a waiting room. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to the stomach. I looked at Xavier, the man I'd spent 40 hours a week, with the man who had taught me how to identify Douglas firs and how to track elk, and I saw nothing but a stranger. He wasn't a monster from a movie. He was just a man making a pragmatic decision. In his mind, I was already gone. I was just inventory for the winter rotation. "What is this, Xavier?" I asked, my voice, barely a whisper. "The winter rotation. What are you talking about?" Silas stepped forward, the heavy keys jingling in his hand. "The woods are demanding friend. Keeping a place like this running, clearing the roads, processing the timber. It takes hands. Hands that the government doesn't know about. Hands that don't ask for a paycheck." He looked toward the steel door. Caroline was the July edition. "She's been difficult. She doesn't have the constitution for the work. But you're young, you're strong. And like Xavier said, nobody is looking for you." I glanced at the two men by the stairs. They were thick-necked, bearded guys in flannel, looking at me with the same boredom they'd used to look at a downed tree. They weren't angry. They were just waiting for the order to move. "I'm not staying here," I said, my adrenaline finally overriding the shock. "Everyone says that at first," Silas said. He reached for his belt, pulling out a heavy leather-cased object. A taser. The room was a trap, but it was a trap designed by a survivalist from the 60s. I remembered what Xavier had told me about Silas's father. He was obsessed with the Cold War. Bunkers from that era were built with a very specific flaw. They needed ventilation. Lots of it. I didn't run for the stairs. That's what they expected. Instead, I grabbed a heavy glass beer pitcher from the bar and hurled it at the light fixture hanging over the pool table. Smash. The basement plunged into partial darkness, the only light coming from the glowing embers of the wood stove in the corner and a single flickering bulb near the stairs. I didn't wait. I dove behind the bar, sliding across the sticky floor. "Get him!" Silas roared, his calm persona finally cracking. I heard the heavy boots of the two men thundering across the concrete. I didn't try to fight them. I knew the layout of the rec room now. Behind the bar was a small dumbwaiter, a relic from when the house was built, to transport food down to the bunker. It was small, meant for trays, but a person of my build could fit if they were desperate enough. I scrambled into the wooden box, my heart hammering against my teeth. I grabbed the hemp rope and pulled with every ounce of strength I had. The pulley groaned, a high-pitched metallic scream that gave away my position instantly. "He's in the lift," one of the men yelled. I felt the box jerk. Someone had grabbed the rope from below. I was suspended 5 feet in the air, trapped in a wooden cage. I looked up. The hatch at the top of the shaft was just 3 feet away. I kicked the door of the dumbwaiter outward, the wood splintering, and I lunged for the upper floor. I tumbled out into the kitchen. It was empty, the box of cell phones sitting right there on the counter. I didn't grab mine. I didn't have time. I heard the men crashing through the basement door behind me. I didn't run for the front door either. I knew they'd have people outside by the bonfire. Instead, I ran for the mudroom. I grabbed a heavy brush axe, a tool I knew how to use, and smashed the window of the side door. I leaped through the jagged frame, the glass slicing through my jacket and into my forearm, but I didn't feel it. I hit the ground and sprinted. Not toward the logging road, toward the brush. "These woods eat people," Xavier had said. I was betting my life on the fact that they wouldn't eat me tonight. I heard them behind me, the heavy crashing of boots and the whistling of Silas's commands. They had flashlights now, the beams cutting through the thick Washington mist like searchlights. "He's headed for the ridge," someone shouted. I didn't head for the ridge. I used my forestry training. I found a seasonal creek bed, a wash, and I slid into the freezing ankle-deep water. Water doesn't leave a scent for dogs, and it muffles the sound of footsteps. I stayed low, moving like a ghost through the ferns and the Devil's Club. I hiked for 4 hours. I didn't have a compass, but I had the stars and the slope of the land. I knew the logging road ran north to south. If I could just hit the main artery, I might find a truck. Around 4:00 a.m., the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by the bone-chilling cold of a Washington spring night. My arm was throbbing my blood loss, making me lightheaded. I collapsed against the base of a massive cedar, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when I heard it. The sound of a truck engine. I scrambled toward the sound, coming out onto a dirt track about half a mile from the main road. A white pickup truck was idling there. I didn't think. I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my bloody arms. The truck slammed on its brakes. The door opened. It was a local park ranger, a guy I'd seen at the regional office once or twice. "Jesus, kid, what happened to you?" he asked, rushing over with a first aid kit. "The house," I gasped, pointing back toward the deep woods. "Silas. The basement. There's a girl named Caroline. They're holding people." The ranger's expression shifted. It wasn't shock. It was a look of weary, heavy sadness. "Silas," he whispered. "Not again." He helped me into the truck and immediately got on his radio. Within an hour, the quiet woods were swarming with state police and tactical units. But when they reached the cedar cabin, it was already too late. The bonfire was still smoldering, but the house was empty. The rec room had been stripped. The steel door was standing wide open. There was no Caroline. There was no Silas. There was no Xavier. They had disappeared into the woods. They knew better than any map. The police found evidence, though. In the crawl space beneath the basement, they found the belongings of over a dozen people. ID cards, wallets, cell phones, including mine, and a collection of work boots in various sizes. They found Caroline's ID. She had been reported missing from a music festival 3 towns over 3 years ago. I was placed in protective custody for a month, but they never found them. The family of the woods had vanished like smoke. I quit my job in forestry the next week. I moved back to the city, back to the noise, and the lights, and the people. I thought I was safe. But 6 months ago, I was walking to my car after a late shift at my new job. It was a rainy night, the kind that reminded me too much of Washington. I reached into my pocket for my keys, but I felt something else. A small wooden chip. A token used in the regional forestry offices to mark a site for clearing. On the back of the chip, written in that familiar, neat architectural script, were 4 words: "The winter is coming." I don't go to parties anymore. I don't go to bonfires. I don't even like going to the park, because I know that Silas and Xavier are still out there. They're still looking for hands to help them through the winter, and they know exactly what my hands look like.